Good afternoon. Good afternoon and welcome all the attendees to this event, which will be held in English. However, let me do part of this introduction in Spanish, since one of the priorities of the Fundación Ramón Areces is to foster the use of the Spanish language in science. Buenas tardes, mi nombre es Daniel Santín.
Good evening, my name is Manuel Santín. I'm a lecturer in economics at the Complutense University of Madrid. And on behalf of the director of the Areces Foundation, I'd like to welcome you to this event. To start with, and in an increasingly virtual world, I would very much like to thank all of you for attending this conference in person. A conference which is entitled Experimentation, Science and Fight Against Poverty, a 20 years retrospective, which will be given by Professor Abhijit Banerjee, director and co-founder of JPAL and Nobel Prize in Economics in 2019, together with Professor Flo and my
for the effort of being here today and for all your research work during these years, which for many scholars in economics, including myself, is a source of learning, reflection, and inspiration. En segundo lugar, quisiera agradecer a JPAL.
Secondly, I'd like to thank JPAL Europe for its commitment in co-organizing this conference. As you can imagine, bringing a Nobel Prize winner of economics to Madrid is no easy task. And yet, both Kirian Nolan, director of JPAL Europe in the Paris School of Economics, and Ana García Hernández, coordinator of JPAL in Spain, have made a tremendous effort so we could all enjoy this lecture here tonight. Dear Kilian and Anna, thank you so much for your work and your support. And finally, I'd like to thank Mónica Martínez Bravo for her role today as moderator of this lecture. Professor Martínez Bravo is currently undoubtedly amongst the top Spanish economists, with a PhD in economics from MIT. Since 2013 has been teaching, and for a few weeks she's been Secretary General of Inclusion at the Ministry of Inclusion, Social Security and Migration. And so I would like to take advantage of this opportunity to congratulate her on this appointment. I wish you the best of luck and the greatest possible success, which will undoubtedly be good for Spanish society.
Professor Martínez Bravo for introducing Professor Banerjee and the issue of the conference. I would like to quote a thought that I found the past summer reading the book Good Economics for Hard Time, this one, co-authored by Professors Duflo and Banerjee. The quote is the following: ideas are powerful. Ideas drive change. Good economics alone cannot save us. But without it, we are doomed to repeat the mistakes of yesterday. Thank you very much, and Professor Martínez Bravo, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for this very nice introduction, and welcome everyone. Thank you for coming to spend with us this afternoon here, and a special thank you to Professor Abhijit Banerjee for being with us today. It's an honor to introduce Professor Banerjee for many reasons, but the first one in particular because he was my PhD advisor. So he has been a tremendous source of inspiration and support throughout the many years, and I'm extremely happy to see his compromise with Spain, and in particular with his efforts to keep promoting the best possible research in the world, but also within Spain. So as has been said before, Professor Banerjee has substantial merits everywhere you go. So he was educated in the University of Calcutta in India. He received his PhD in economics from Harvard University, and he's currently Ford Foundation International Professor of Economics at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. In 2003, he founded, together with Esther Duflo and Selnir Mullainathan, JPAL, which is an organization that promotes randomized controlled trials and the use of evidence to improve policy making to fight against poverty throughout the world. This organization has been transformative in the way that we understand development economics and how and has increased the rigor of development economics and policies to fight against poverty quite dramatically. And in part because of that and his drive to fight against poverty with an experimental approach and with the highest possible rigor, he was awarded the Nobel Prize of Economics in 2019, together with Esther Duflo and Michael Kremer, again for their experimental approach in the fight against poverty. So I was actually here not so long ago, right after they won the Nobel Prize, to talk about their contributions. And a few years have passed by, but I think it's great that we come here today with him in the audience to also tell us what we have learned, and even in the more recent period. Professor Banerjee has made, as I mentioned before, tremendous contributions to push this experimental approach in the fight against poverty, which has transformed very deeply the field of development economics and applied economics in general. But even before that, he was one of the main scholars in development economics and has also made key contributions to the field of economic theory, labor economics, and also bringing a behavioral economic approach to economic development and to understand the lives of the poor and the decision-making of poor individuals. All this was accomplished, and I could attest, by taking very good care of their PhD students, so thank you, Abhijit, also for that. But even beyond the PhD students, that also shows that he and Esther Duflo as well are individuals that care very deeply about others and always make the most to help everyone around them. So I think that's also something that deserves a lot of credit. As I mentioned also briefly before, Abhijit Banerjee is has also taken a number of steps in the last year to support an initiative that we have been supporting also from the Ministry of Inclusion, Social Security and Migration, to bring the best possible evidence and the best possible science into policymaking in Spain. And today we are actually launching the next phase of this initiative by announcing the creation of a lab in cooperation with JPAL that will continue to foster the best possible and rigorous evidence to help design policies from government, from the Ministry of Inclusion, to help vulnerable populations. So thank you a lot, Abhijit, for being here, for being open to keep pushing for this agenda, for your help and your time, that we know that it's a very scarce resource. And thank you all for staying here with us. Thank you.
Thank you very much for being here. It's Spain. You have 7 o'clock is not unusual. I'm still a bit shocked by that. In the US, by now, people have had dinner and they are, sleep. So it's nice to be in a different place with a different norm. It's really a very, thank you, Monica, for that introduction. You're very kind. You know, it's one of the great pleasures of being a professor to have wonderful students like you. I also want to say that in some sense, you know, this is as much a moment of pride and honor for me as it for anyone else. I feel very much that this idea of a lab being created inside the ministry to push the agenda of making decisions based on evidence, much as obvious as that might seem, is very rare. It almost never happens, and this one in particular has shown enormous amount of sort of character and vibrancy already. So I should start by saying this is a moment where I'm always happy to come to Spain, and I'm particularly happy to be here on this day when I feel that, you know, something really rather remarkable is being achieved here. So thank you very much for having me speak. I want to, you know, this is the 20th year of, or last year was the 20th year since the founding of JPAL, and being a bit, you know, we don't have many such achievements, so we are sort of extending it a bit. It's spreading into the next year, but we have been celebrating the 20 years of JPAL worldwide. Now, what is JPAL? And maybe I'm going to tell you a little bit about, you know, what we do. So JPAL is the Abdul Latif Jameel Poverty Action Lab. It's actually kind of a network of labs, really. One in Europe, one in North America, one in South Asia, one in Southeast Asia, one in Sub-Saharan Africa, one in Latin America. So and you know, other offices in the MENA region. So it's really a network of labs, and together, what we try to do is we try to fight poverty with the best evidence. Now, I think what this slide is, I think, telling us, and this is sort of a good starting point. It's certainly the starting point that we were pushed by, which is this fact that it's, you know, if you might, it's easy to be despondent. It's easy to think that there is just the problems of poverty in the world are just too big. And I think what this slide is telling us that, you know, there was, despite lots of progress, about 1 in 7 people in the world were hungry in 2022. That's a number that's should shock us, should trouble us. And then I think the question is, and this is where I think our agenda comes in. One possible reaction to that is, that's too big a problem. What do we do? I mean, is there just, should we just give up? And I think, and we started from the premise that the only way we would deal with these problems is by breaking them into smaller, solvable problems, try to find the solution, solve that problem, then solve the next problem. To do it incrementally with the idea that the accretion of all these insights will eventually give us a way to solve the big problem. That the big problem is really many small problems, and that if we believe that and we act on that view, then that progress can be made. And I mean, this is not to say that progress is linear or that there is any guarantee that progress is just going to happen on itself. We know that the pandemic was a big shock. There is and yet, and it's easy to get despondent about the world. I mean, the world of today is one where, if you look around, there's many frightening things happening. Climate change is absolutely on us, and it's doing its work as we speak, and we know that these problems are enormous and that we aren't doing quite enough to solve them. So it's easy to get frightened. It's also worth saying, however, that the world, despite appearances, despite the fact that it looks like the world is in terrible shape, the last 20 years actually have been among the best that we know for the world's poorest. World poverty has fallen faster in these years than in any previous period that we know of. And not just poverty, and it's not just, people in China. This is true in sub-Saharan Africa. It's true, and moreover, it comes with many, many different other benefits. Maternal mortality has crashed, and so has child mortality. Both of them are more than halved in the last 20 years. So these are really in the places where they were really high, they've been halved. So it's really, these are really massive steps in improving the human condition. So in that sense, I think the first order fact is that we shouldn't, I think it's easy to be frightened by the reality, but I think somehow it's not all bad. Among that, I would say one of the things that has happened recently is that a lot of governments realized with the pandemic that they were actually in a very, they were not in a very good shape to help people even when they wanted. One of the things that they discovered was that many countries just don't have the infrastructure to make transfers to people who need it. They have, they don't have the database, they don't have the ability to judge who needs, they don't have even the financial infrastructure for sending money to people. So it was, and I think that as a result, there has been actually some, I think, relatively quick progress in terms of government's commitments to improving the infrastructure for helping the poor. So I say all that because it's a world where a lot of things are happening, lots of things are changing, not all for the good, I'm not even saying necessarily a majority for the good, but lots of things that are happening, lots of things that are potentially either important or potentially damaging. Lots of choices are being made, and what we do in JPAL is to try to say, look, before we make policies, let's decide whether those policies work. Let's try to generate the best evidence possible to come to some at least some reasonable conclusion that what we're doing makes sense. How do we do it? We do it, this is something that by now everybody knows about. These are the idea that if you choose your beneficiaries randomly and then you look at you compare the effect, that gives you a very simple way to say, is the program working or not? That's how medical trials are conducted. What we do is kind of like medical trials and kind of not like medical trials. So a medical trial will have 60 people in treatment and 60 people in control. They will pretty much, be committed to taking the medicine every day or every week or whatever they have to take it. We work in a world where we have no such control. The Spanish government doesn't control, they might give a grant for education, but it cannot control whether that grant gets used for a good education or bad education, whether the child studies or not. So as a result, the trials we do are enormous in size relative to the medical trials. Often, I've been involved in trials that had 11 million people in them. So and so they operate in a different scale. And that's not because I like scale. It's because the interventions cannot be kind of spoon-fed to people. The interventions happen at some environmental level. A government decides that in every village it will do some intervention. There are lots of villages, lots of people, and then, but in each of those villages, maybe 5 people will benefit from those, and we don't know which 5 they are. So therefore, you, in a sense, are inevitably forced to study these things at an enormous scale. And what we do in JPAL is we have evolved a body of knowledge that allows us to do these trials at these enormous scales. That's the sort of maybe the mojo of JPAL. We've done a bunch of these. There's 1,640 randomized control trials across the world. And you can see that they're everywhere. They're in Spain, in France, in US, in Peru, Chile, Kenya, India, China, Mongolia, Indonesia. So they're really in 95 countries. So we work across the world. And the reason why we work across the world is that we have no specific commitment to any particular strategy of alleviating poverty. We don't come with the answer. We come with a message that if you want the answer to the question, is what you're doing working, we can provide you a way of getting there. So we're not promising, we come with no predetermined message other than the message from previous evaluations which say, well, you can try that, but we've done the evaluations of that several times and it doesn't work or it works. So we come with the past knowledge from other evaluations, but we come with no other particular, we don't offer a kind of pre-crafted message for anybody. So what we do instead is, if people say, we have an interesting education program, we evaluate it. We say we have an interesting program in promoting, gender relations, we also evaluate it. If it is one about improving governance, we evaluate it. We're really, in that sense, we try at least to be honest brokers, just to say, to look at the data and say whether the program works or not. And we work in finance, we work in environment, we work in health. So we have we don't start with some prejudice or some view that health is the most important thing or agriculture is the most important thing. We do whatever we're invited to do. Now, why do we insist that it's important to do rigorous evaluations? What's the logic? So I think that multiple pieces of the logic. I think one of them is simply we're very we can sort of, economists are often pretty good at saying, look, maybe this is a good program. We should have this kind of, we should invest more in education. Maybe it's right. But what does it mean, invest more in education? It's not that when you go to a school, you say, okay, invest more, and they do it. That sentence doesn't, if you're actually a school administrator, that sentence doesn't actually mean anything. What means something is, let's try this way of teaching versus that way of teaching. Or this way of, should we invest more in computers or in textbooks? Should we invest more in teacher training or in teacher training or in getting laptops to people. So eventually it gets into many things that all of which might make perfect sense a priori, but we have no idea which one is a better use of the money. And so part of what we try to do is we try to answer those questions. Partly, as I said, while we don't come in with any particular policy bias, we often come in with the bias that comes from previous evidence. So we come with the evidence that, look, this has been tried and that has been tried, and overall the evidence suggests that number 1 works pretty well and number 2 doesn't. And we can tell you that, and you can still say that, look, you know, I prefer to do number 2, and then we'll evaluate number 2. The second thing that we emphasize is that it's not just enough for something to work. It's also important that we know how much it costs. And one advantage of working in this experimental mode is that then we know what is an intervention. We know that this was the plan, this was implemented here, not implemented here. We can see what were the extra inputs that went in there. We can cost them. We can say how much it would cost. And therefore, we are in a position to say, it is this intervention works very well, but it's very expensive. And this other intervention works less well, but it's so much cheaper, then overall it's better. So we are that gives us, the other thing that it allows us to do, it allows us to understand, because we are directly doing the experiment, we get to understand what is it that we are actually doing. So when you ask somebody who's running a program, what you're doing in the program, he'll say, I'm doing this important thing, which is probably right, but he often won't know or hasn't thought about all the other things I'm doing. I'm giving these teachers this great training. It's important, but it may also be that I'm not only giving this great training, I'm giving them 4 days a month off to go get that training, and on those days I'm giving them a stipend of 100 euros each every day, and during those times they meet other teachers and they talk to other teachers. So I think part of what we are very mindful of, because we do it as an experiment, is the fact that when you do an intervention, you're not only doing that intervention, you're doing many things to make that intervention possible. You think you're doing the training, but you're also creating a community of teachers. So part of what we do when we design experiments is we try to identify which of those elements are important. And that's critical from being able to say that this is in fact the reason why this program works, and these other things, and therefore that's why what we are saying can be, you sort of understand the theory of why it's working, and because you understand that, you can say that, look, therefore, as long as you do these 3 things, it is probably going to work elsewhere too. The flip side of that is also true. So as I said, we often go in there with an open mind. We don't really start with the idea that we have a clear answer to a question. But we live in a world where many people do. Well, I remember working with on microcredit. Microcredit was this very popular idea, still popular, but it was less popular now, of the early 2000s, when the idea was that you give small loans to very small loans, 200 euro loans to people, poor people, and they all become entrepreneurs. And one of the things that, and when we wanted to go do an evaluation of that claim, but most people told us that, it's obvious, it works. These people, they need money. I didn't disagree that they need money, but whether they would therefore be able to start successful businesses was less obvious. And one of the things that we managed to do in that evaluation was to show that, in fact, the money does many good things. They buy refrigerators, they buy televisions, they're happy, but they don't get richer, they don't start businesses, they don't, you know, all of the things that, so in some sense, I think it's easy. We live in a world where people have, I think, rightly, lots of theories. And one of the advantages of a randomized control trial is that it tests the theory without assuming the theory. It tests the theory sort of as something that, okay, if you tell me, we'll test it out. And I think that several reasons why that particular view of theory is important. So one is simply that theories can be, you know, theories are often based on human behavior, and we are less than perfect in judging human behavior. In fact, these women who took those loans they didn't really want to start businesses. They told us that they'd rather buy a television, and that was fine by me, but it was exactly the theory was often wrong. It was also the case that when we make theories, we often deliberately ignore certain aspects of the environment, and the reason why we ignore them is because it's too complicated to think about all those things, and that's the right thing to do. It's all, the world is too complicated to think about. But when we actually look, but that doesn't mean that the world cooperates with that. It doesn't mean that because we decided to ignore some aspect of reality, reality also decided to hide that aspect. So sometimes those bite us. And so the second reason why I think it's very important to do experiments is that the theory is often incomplete. It tells its own story, but it misses a key element. We spent lots of time trying to persuade people to give to improve immunization of children in India many years ago. And there were two theories about why children were not immunized. One theory was that the government immunizers are useless, they're not doing their job. That was the NGO theory. The government theory was the opposite. The government theory was that there's no point in trying to immunize these people. These people are superstitious and they don't want to get immunized. So there were two really powerful theories, and nobody was willing to consider an alternative. We did an experiment where we competed, we offered people the chance to get immunized in a reliable way. That has a small effect on immunization. What really had a huge effect is what nobody was willing to consider, which is giving people a very small gift every time they got their child immunized. And that doubled the immunization rate, just that small gift. And that was the point is that that particular idea that immunization of children is so important, it saves their lives. Therefore, everybody's theory was that if the people really had the opportunity to do it and they're not doing it, it must be because they have a deep reason to do it. Turned out they had no deep reason to do it. They just forgot. And so if you say, okay, no, there'll be a present for you if you show up, then they remembered it and they showed up and the children got immunized. So, and that we have done now multiple times, and it works, and then has been done in many countries. So the point being that it's not, we have our own theories of how people behave, and then people behave, and sometimes those are not the same thing. And finally, I mean, it's just, there are even, if you think about the economics of many instances, in many situations, you know that basically you can make up as many theories as you want. There are many mechanisms. Some of those mechanisms are probably less plausible than others, but even the plausible ones there are many of. And it's hard to know which one is actually the right one. So I think for all of these reasons, we've sort of been insisting that I think before we go too far based on our theories, we should actually test it. This has been, I mean, we started in the mid-90s. You can see there was nothing nothing was published till the late 90s, and now there are obviously many more. So it's been more, maybe that would have been, that's academic success. What I think is more cheering is that if you look at this is the adoption of programs that were first subject to an evaluation and then adopted. Okay? That's one way to tell the story, and now it's, I think, up to 600 million. That's actually an underestimate of the impact, because think about what I said about microcredit. One of the things that our negative evidence on microcredit did was it stopped it being used as a dominant anti-poverty tool. So that also affected the lives of people. I'm not counting that. That's another several hundred million people who benefited from not being told that your life is saved by microcredit. So I have 10 more minutes? 10 more minutes, yeah? Yeah. So let me tell you a little bit about what's an example. So here's one. I'm going to run quickly through it. There's more slides here than I'll talk about, but I think it's an interesting one. So this is a program that was invented by a Bangladeshi NGO called BRAC, and what it does is it gives people a package, very poor people. These are people who are, the way we actually did this was we went to a village and we asked the very poor people there, who is really poor? And the very poor people said, that person's really poor. So we took the poorest of the poor, who were often women without any, who were begging to survive. And they were given an asset, typically asset of their choice, which usually meant a cow or some goats or something to sell. And they were given that, and they were given some training and some temporary cash assistance. We did randomized control trials in 7 countries. The question that we were most interested in is, are these people poor because they are unable to be productive, or are they poor because they just happen to be unlucky and they started poor? And the reason why this is an interesting hypothesis is, of course, that, I mean, personally, I believe everybody has talent, and but that's my personal belief. But it opens up at least the question: is it the case that if this person is poor only because they started poor, then if I give them a start, maybe they don't fall back into poverty. Once I give them a start, then maybe they're going to be, let's say less poor for the rest of their lives, or for their children will also be less poor, and so on. So that's the idea of a poverty trap. So we're interested in that. We find that indeed there is evidence of a poverty trap. So people at 10 years after the program started, the people who got the program are still 33% richer. They're eating 33% more. That suggests that it was not that the people who were poor were not poor because they lacked any particular skill, but because they started poor. Because if you give them an asset, now this doesn't mean that they kept the cow, the original cow was feeding them. The original cow was always dead. They had bought another cow, or they had started a business, or they had sent their children to get a job somewhere else. But the main point being that that what it showed was that this was something that you could do to get durable change. This is the evidence from other countries, from Pakistan, from Ghana, from Ethiopia, and you can see that the gains are in all the countries. And then the question we wanted to ask is the money enough? So we gave them an asset, we also gave them a lot of hand-holding and training. Is it important to have the hand-holding and training? The reason why that's an interesting question is, of course, is that the hand-holding and training was actually pretty expensive. Somebody had to go and tell them, yes, this is how this is what you feed a cow. And this was expensive, so did we want to, and we learned that in fact that how do we test that? Well, some people we gave in Ghana, in some people we gave the goats, that's what they all wanted, and some people we gave the goats and training. And the goats and training just worked much better. So it seemed like these people, at least these people, remember these are not normal poor people. Even poor people think they're poor. They're often people who never had a chance in life. So it seemed like you needed that. The last question we asked is that, one prejudice that there is often in thinking about poor people is that if you give them money, they'll become lazy. Now that, as I've been suggesting, that goes against the logic of what I've been saying, which is that, in fact, people want to do things, they just don't get to do it because they don't have a chance. But do they become lazy? No, of course not. They work harder. No, why is it not going the right way? The time spent productively is, after 10 years, is about 30% higher. So they're working harder. Why are they working harder? And in this process of figuring out why this program is, one thing we realized is that it must be because we could design the experiment to figure out that in fact it must be because they are actually partly because they're psychologically depressed when they are very poor, and when you give them a chance, they become less depressed, and therefore they work harder. So that was all good news, and as a result, this program has now been adopted in 42 countries. And that includes, now about about 1 million people in India alone are getting this program. Well, to go from India or developing world to Europe, what's the kind of work we do in Europe? So let me give you an example. We work on many things, but here's an interesting one from Italy. It turns out that in Italy, at the end of 8th grade, you have to take a decision to go to either vocational school or to go to normal school. And if you look at the same immigrant children and traditionally Italian children people who were not immigrants, and you compare children with the same grade level, the immigrant children were much more likely to go to vocational than the others. And that was probably because they didn't realize that they could study other things, and they thought that they were not as smart as the others. But in fact, they're exactly the same grade. People with the same grades had very different pathways. And what this experiment does is it basically tells them the best students in grade 6 that they can get tutoring and career counseling, encouraging them to take a more ambitious path. And when they do that, they indeed they are 7% more likely to take the academic stream. They are 44% less likely to, they work harder, they're more enthusiastic, they're about 44% less likely to repeat a year, so they keep in class, and their math scores and reading scores are much higher, about a year's worth higher. So they are really just this encouragement, telling people that you can do it. You can also go to a good school. Really improves their performance in every way. It's an example of something that almost free, essentially, just very cheap intervention with huge effects on the lives of people. Skip all that. So finally, let me just say that we evaluate programs in Europe. We also work with governments. We work with the French government. We work with the Italian government. We work with the Spanish government, of course. We work with the Turkish government. We work all over Europe. And part of the work we do is not just in terms of evaluating specific policies, or a lot of once you get into that world, you realize that data is very important. And one of the other things we do is we help governments build infrastructure so that their data can be used to evaluate programs. This was hope some time ago, and now the lab is being launched. The lab is in the Ministry of Inclusion, Social Security and Migration in Spain, and the idea is exactly to do all these things, to test programs, to run our cities, but also to gather the information that's available in the world and make it usable. And there's already a large number of researchers involved, large number of RCTs happening, and it's going to be on a range of topics, mostly around education, employability, digitalization, etc. I'm going to skip. So let me finish by saying, what's my hope for as I said, this is an important day for me. What's my hope? My hope is that this idea that we see in Spain will somehow travel to the rest of Europe. I think Spain has been a leader. There has been there are lots of RCTs in other countries, especially in France, but a lot of that has been done piecemeal. What is, I think, unusual in Spain is this idea that you have to build research infrastructure, that you have to build an infrastructure that leads to evidence being not just something that stays on the side, but becomes the center of the of government conversations about programs. That when we want to do something, we want to change something, we want to fix something, we ask the question, what is the evidence? Not all the evidence is going to be from RCTs or from randomized controlled trials. Not all the evidence will come from JPAL. Not all the evidence will be even the quality you want. But to ask the question, what is the evidence? And therefore ask the question, how do we put together the data needed for asking evidentiary questions? How do we get people in government to appreciate what is known and what is not? How do we get people to be skeptical in the right places? So it is to create I hope, and I think I hope Spain will lead us there, a culture of asking questions, of questioning evidence, of judging the quality of evidence, of demanding evidence, of answering questions by evidence in all the governments in Europe. I hope, and on this day, I hope that with this launch of this lab, we start a pathway towards that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Banerjee, for this amazing talk and this opportunity to look back at such an amazing progress. So we're going to open the floor for a few questions. Please keep them brief, and we might not be able to take a lot. But just to break the ice, let me ask you something. So you have told us about the last 20 years. So I wanted to ask you about the next 20 years. What is going to come up, or where do you think things are going? I mean, for a minute, let me take back my academic hat and asking you about the methodology. Where do you see RCTs evolving in terms of towards a more structural approach, towards a combination with AI tools, something like that? And then on another dimension, whether, what are the strategic lines that JPAL is pushing in general regarding topics or scale-ups or other parts of what JPAL's operations are?
In 20 years, I'll be retired. You will be doing, you'll be answering this question. So first, I think the answer to that question, the first and most important answer to that question is that what has been, I think, remarkable in the history of JPAL is precisely the fact that at no point could I predict what the next change would be. Other people, younger people, smarter people did more interesting things, and I said, oh my God, that's what you did? So first answer, I have no idea. I hope I don't have any idea. I hope somebody else with better ideas does it. Okay. I think things that are already in place is more use of AI, as you say, and more use of models, as you say, what you call structural, to think about, how do I connect this RCT result to a specific, maybe a story that we tell. But I think that what will be new and exciting, people like you will find.
And people in the audience here.
And many others, not me.
Any questions? The back.
In English, Spanish.
Either way, if you can maybe stand up and presentarte también.
Thank you very much for your talk. Do you have any thoughts about effective altruism?
Excellent question. So I think that There are many things in effective altruism, some of which are, the idea that, we should give away as much money as we can. I have a great deal of sympathy for. The idea that we should be, utilitarian in the most, I think, reductionist way, I have no sympathy for. And the idea that you should do cryptocurrency trading to make lots of money to give it away. I don't know if you know the story of Sam Bankman-Fried, who I think managed to burn through $9 billion on that. I positively want to avoid.
Questions?
Yes, thank you, Professor Banerjee, for the interesting presentation. I was wondering if you could give us your opinion about the ethical controversy around randomized experiments, or how you deal with these issues. Thank you.
I typically, I'll be honest, I don't deal with it, because I find I think it's based mostly on a ignorance about how the world works. Most of the time, all programs are allocated, even the ones that are meant to be reaching everybody, are allocated haphazardly, to a remarkable extent. So I have little sense that, there was one alternative that everybody will be reached by a particular program, and then we randomized it. Typically, most programs have pilots where they, instead of doing it systematically, they do it badly, meaning they choose some beneficiaries and they compare it to others who are not similar, and then they get the wrong answer. I think in some ways what we are saying is that when you do a pilot, do it well. If you really want to give it to everybody, and you think you can do it, go ahead. But almost nobody can. Almost all programs actually start on some limited region, some limited scale. So I actually don't understand that problem. People have asked me that question many times. I've worked with probably, 40 governments, and I've never seen that actually being the constraint.
Final question? One?
Thank you so much for sharing Jaypal's work. You mentioned climate change and COVID, and I was thinking, as we experience more frequent and more intense crises, do you think, and we need more responsive policies, do you think that this will compromise the implementation of very rigorous evaluation, or do you think there will be more need for very thorough research, as you've shared?
I think that it will become, I think crises are very difficult times to do research. So there is actually remarkably little research, and less research than I would say is needed on crisis handling. It's one thing that's really poorly. On the other hand, to the extent that we can visualize the kinds of crises that are coming, I think we can design experiments that will address some of the issues that will arise. So I do think that we need to be forward-looking. It's a really good question, but I do believe that that the crises are sufficiently predictable, the kind of crisis we're going to get, that I think we could do much better than, say, throwing up our hands and saying we'll wait till the crisis. I think the idea that we need better social coping mechanisms of, getting people into out of flood areas, and I think there is a nice recent study showing that if you actually give people enough early warning, the effects are much smaller. So I think there is actually work happening exactly along those lines, but I think a lot more needs to happen.
Okay, let's leave it here, and let's thank once again Professor Banerjee for being with us today. Thank you.